What we're seeing here is a critical failure of the system. The projections were entirely wrong.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Vanished Lands. In the heart of Turkmenistan's Karakum Desert, there exists a fiery chasm that has burned for over 50 years, a fire that should have been extinguished long ago. But what if the flames are not just a natural disaster? What if there's something far darker, something ancient waiting to break free? As the fire flickers and dims, it's not the end. It's the beginning of something much worse. Something has been unleashed, something that has been hidden beneath the earth for millennia. And now it's free. What lies beyond the flames? And who, or what, is watching, waiting, and calling? The answers are more terrifying than you could ever imagine. Step into a world of mystery, suspense, and ancient horrors. The door to hell has opened, but the true danger has only just begun. Stay with us as we uncover the secrets buried beneath the fire, secrets that will change everything. In the heart of Turkmenistan, deep within the scorching expanse of the Karakum Desert, there exists a place so mysterious, so impossible, that many would argue it should never have existed at all. A place where fire, unrelenting and untamed, continues to burn, defying the very laws of nature. This place, known as the door to hell, has baffled scientists, explorers, and even governments for decades. It is a place that draws both awe and fear, where the heat never ceases and the flames never die. But what is the truth behind the fire that has burned for over 50 years? And why does it continue to rage? The story begins in 1971, when a group of Soviet scientists ventured into the vast emptiness of the Karakum Desert, looking for something seemingly innocent, a natural resource. What they sought was natural gas, something they believed would fuel their country for years to come. The desert, though harsh and unforgiving, was thought to hold vast amounts of untapped energy beneath its scorching surface. With modern technology, drilling deep into the earth seemed like the next logical step. However, as the drilling operation began, something went horribly wrong. A massive explosion ripped through the earth. The ground trembled violently beneath their feet. The sky was filled with dust, and what had once been a calm desert landscape was suddenly consumed by chaos. The team of scientists had accidentally struck a massive natural gas pocket, and in an instant, a deadly explosion sent plumes of fire soaring into the sky. But the most astonishing part of this disaster was not the explosion itself, nor the destruction that followed. It was what happened next. While the engineers and scientists scrambled to contain the flames and prevent them from spreading, something extraordinary occurred. The fire, though initially feared to be a temporary incident, did not fade. Instead, it grew, and it grew. It became more powerful with each passing day, feeding off the very gases beneath the surface. What was intended to be a controlled accident soon became something much darker, much more terrifying. Despite all their efforts, the fire would not go out. Weeks turned into months, and months into years. The flames, a relentless inferno, continued to consume the earth. At first, it seemed like a simple industrial disaster, an inconvenient accident that could eventually be extinguished. But time passed, and no amount of water, sand, or engineering expertise could stop the fire from burning. The world's attention soon turned to this strange phenomenon. As news of the door to hell spread, so did rumors. Some whispered that the flames were not merely a natural consequence of human error, but something far more ominous. They spoke of ancient myths, of fiery portals that could open to another world, to hell itself. In a region of the world so rich in history and mystery, the tales began to circulate. Perhaps this was not just an accident. Perhaps it was a door that should have never been opened. For those who ventured close to the fire, the sense of unease only deepened. The Karakum Desert, once a silent and lifeless wasteland, had become the site of something inexplicable. The fire, which burned with a ferocity that seemed unnatural, cast long shadows on the surrounding sands. The crackling of the flames, the endless roar of the inferno, created an eerie atmosphere. The heat radiated so intensely that even the most seasoned explorers struggled to get near it without feeling overwhelmed. As years turned into decades, the fire's grip on the desert never loosened. It was as though the land itself had been cursed, as though something ancient, something malevolent, had been unleashed. Some began to question whether this fire was a mere coincidence or something far more deliberate. Could this have been a natural occurrence, or was it the result of something much darker? In the early 2000s, rumors began to spread that strange occurrences were happening around the fire. Locals and explorers reported hearing odd noises late at night. Low growls, unsettling whispers, and distant voices that seemed to come from the very heart of the inferno. It was as though something was trapped within, something that wanted to escape. The air was thick with tension, and the fire's presence began to feel more like a warning than an accident. Some believed that the fire was not just a manifestation of natural gas, but a direct link to something more otherworldly. There were whispers of a gate to another dimension, a gateway that had been accidentally opened by the Soviets all those years ago. Was it possible that, with their drilling, they had disturbed an ancient force, an entity or presence that had lain dormant beneath the surface of the desert for centuries? The more one looked into the origins of the fire, the more the lines between history, myth, and reality began to blur. To add to the mystery, archaeologists began to uncover evidence of ancient civilizations in the surrounding desert. Unearthed relics, ruins of long-forgotten cities, and strange artifacts hinted that this area had been of immense significance to those who lived here long before the Soviet Union ever arrived. Could these ancient people have known something about the fire, about the forces that lay hidden beneath the sands? Was the fire a punishment, a warning, or perhaps something far older, an enduring flame that had never been meant to go out? As the fire continued to burn, experts tried to explain its persistence. Some attributed it to the unique geological conditions of the area, while others insisted that the gas pockets were so vast that they could sustain the flames indefinitely. But as time wore on, the scientific community grew increasingly perplexed. No one had ever seen anything like it. The fire's seemingly eternal flame refused to follow the natural laws of combustion, leaving the scientific community searching for answers that they couldn't find. But there was something more, something that even the scientists couldn't explain. The fire seemed to take on a life of its own, growing hotter with time. In fact, it had begun to spread, slowly creeping outward, expanding its territory in a way that defied all logic. What was fueling this ever-burning fire? Was there something beneath the earth that no one had yet discovered? And what are the strange occurrences around the area? The whispers, the unexplained phenomena that many had brushed off as superstition. What if they were warning signs of something darker at work? The door to hell was no longer just a curiosity. It had become a symbol of something far more ominous. It was as if it had awakened something long forgotten, a slumbering presence that was now stirring beneath the surface. And as it burned, the questions only grew. What lay beneath the inferno? Was this really a natural disaster? Or was it a doorway, an entryway to something far more sinister? The door to hell had become a living legend, a place that not only drew people in with its strange allure, but also left them with a sense of dread. It was a place where the flames never went out, where the heat never abated, and where the very air seemed to crackle with an energy that was both unnatural and unsettling. It was a place that held its secrets close, unwilling to reveal what lay beneath its fiery surface. The fire, though burning endlessly, had become something much more than just a natural disaster. It had become a mystery, a riddle wrapped in flames, a doorway to something no one truly understood. And as more and more people visited, attempting to uncover the truth, one thing became clear. The door to hell was not just a place. It was a warning. A warning of what, though? What had been awakened by the drilling? What forces lay beneath the surface of the earth? The fire, so persistent and so powerful, had captivated the imagination of those who dared to look. It was a phenomenon that could not be explained. But the deeper one dug, the more one realized that the mystery of the door to hell was not one that could easily be solved. For decades, the fire burned, and with it, the question remained, what else lies within this inferno? What secrets have yet to be uncovered? As the flames continue to rage, the world watches, waiting for answers that may never come. And as the desert winds blow across the scorched earth, one thing remains certain. The door to hell is a mystery that will never truly be understood. The heat from the Karakum Desert in Turkmenistan is unbearable, but it is not the sun that burns the land. Instead, it is the eternal flames of the door to hell, a place where fire has been raging for over 5 decades, undisturbed, unrelenting, as if the earth itself refuses to let go of the flames it birthed. The Soviet Union thought they could contain it. Engineers poured water, sand, and even chemicals into the inferno, hoping to extinguish it. But nothing worked. The flames didn't just persist, they thrived. And as years passed, scientists began to ask a question that seemed both logical and yet utterly unsettling. Why doesn't it end? The fire that began as an accidental drilling disaster in 1971 had become something far beyond human comprehension. At first, there was hope, of course. Hope that the flames, fed by natural gas, would burn themselves out in a matter of weeks or months. But the weeks turned into months, and the months into years. Now, decades later, the fire continues to scorch the desert, its ominous glow lighting up the horizon at night, casting shadows that stretch far across the desolate land. It is a phenomenon that has defied the very laws of nature, and as scientists gather to study it, they were left with more questions than answers. In the early days, the official explanation was simple. A gas leak caused by the drilling had sparked the fire. The engineers, unable to contain the flames, decided to let it burn itself out. The plan seemed sound, but as the fire grew and its intensity never wavered, something else began to happen. The fire wasn't just burning, it was spreading. It was consuming more than just the natural gas pockets beneath the surface. It was reaching places no one thought possible, seeping into the earth as if searching for something deeper. Why didn't it stop? A team of scientists and engineers determined to get to the bottom of this eternal flame were dispatched to investigate. They approached the site, standing on the very edge of the crater, feeling the intense heat radiating from the fire. It was like standing before the mouth of an inferno, a creature that seemed alive, breathing, waiting for something. The scientists had come prepared, armed with tools and theories, thinking they had a solution. After all, this was just a gas leak. How hard could it be to put out? But as they began their investigation, something peculiar became evident. The fire had an energy all its own, an energy that didn't match any natural laws they understood. The scientists conducted tests, measuring the temperatures, analyzing the gas levels, and charting the movements of the flames. They even drilled into the surrounding land to see if they could find any new pockets of gas that could explain the fire's persistence. What they found was deeply perplexing. There were no new sources of fuel. The flames weren't just burning natural gas. They were feeding on something else. The temperatures reached extremes that no one had ever seen before. The scientists began to theorize that there was something beneath the surface, something that was acting as an unseen catalyst for the fire. But what could it be? At first, the team speculated that there might be an undiscovered reserve of gas deeper underground. The fire had to be fueled by something, right? But as their investigations deepened, the answers grew murkier. The readings they took didn't add up. They couldn't find a clear explanation for how the fire kept burning. Gas reserves were finite, after all, yet the flames didn't behave like they were simply burning gas. It was as if the fire had a will of its own purpose. Some of the more experienced engineers began to entertain a darker, far more unsettling idea. Could this fire be the result of something not entirely natural? Something older than any gas deposit? Older than even the drilling itself? They began to delve into the region's ancient history. Turkmenistan, after all, was no stranger to legends, myths, and old tales passed down through generations. The Karakum Desert, with its vast emptiness, had long been seen as a place of mystery, a land where the sands hid secrets from civilizations long forgotten. It wasn't long before the idea emerged. What if this fire was not caused by a modern accident at all? What if it had been burning long before the Soviets ever arrived? What if the fire had a more ancient origin? This theory was bold, far-fetched, even, but it was becoming harder to dismiss. The desert was ancient, and beneath the surface, it held layers of history that had remained hidden for millennia. Could the fire be connected to something buried deep beneath the Earth's crust, something that had been disturbed by the drilling? There were whispers that the fire was not merely a geological event, but the awakening of something far older, something that had been sealed away for a reason. The more the scientists explored, the more they were drawn to the eerie possibility that the fire might not just be burning natural gas. Some began to suggest that the fire could be fueled by something else, something not of this world. Could the flames be a manifestation of something ancient, a remnant of a forgotten civilization, or an unknown force buried deep under the desert sands? They weren't sure, but the ideas seemed to take hold. But the fire might be part of a much larger, much more complex mystery. It wasn't just the fire that began to seem strange. The desert itself seemed to be alive with secrets. Local villagers who had lived for generations near the inferno told stories of strange occurrences, lights in the sky, unexplainable noises that echoed across the desert at night, and shadows that danced near the crater even when no one was around. Some claimed to have seen strange figures moving in the distance, figures that didn't belong to any living creatures known to them. The fire, in their minds, wasn't just a fire. It was alive, an entity that had taken root in the desert. The fire's presence was unnerving. The closer the scientists got to the crater, the more they felt an inexplicable pull, a sense of being watched, as though something or someone was lurking in the shadows. Their investigations became more intense, but so did their unease. They found themselves wondering if they were simply digging deeper into a puzzle that didn't want to be solved. Then came a strange part, the part that no one could explain. The fire, after years of burning at a steady, unrelenting pace, began to burn hotter. Much hotter. As the team continued their attempts to put out the flames, they noticed an unsettling shift. No matter what methods they used, water, foam, even the most advanced firefighting equipment, the fire didn't just resist. It seemed to grow. With every attempt to quell the inferno, the flames leaped higher, reaching toward the sky, as though the fire was not only fighting back, but it was thriving on the effort to extinguish it. The temperature soared. The surrounding land began to warp under the extreme heat. The team could feel the earth tremble beneath their feet, as if the desert itself was awakening, stretching out after a long slumber. The flames seemed to pulse, almost as if they were breathing, alive and hungry for more. The mystery deepened. What could possibly be fueling this fire? What was underneath the earth, beneath the surface of the desert, that no one had accounted for? No amount of science, no matter how advanced, could explain it. And the longer they stood there, watching the flames leap higher, the more the scientists realized one simple truth. This fire was not just the result of a simple accident or natural process. It was something far more complicated and far more dangerous. Some began to suggest that the fire was more than just a natural phenomenon. Maybe it wasn't simply gas or geology at play here. Perhaps the fire was part of a larger mechanism, something built into the desert eons ago, perhaps as a warning or a trap. It was as if the flames themselves were the keeper of a secret that no one was meant to discover. What was causing the fire to burn so hot, so persistently? Was it merely gas beneath the Earth's surface, or was it something far older, far darker, and beyond understanding? With every day that passed, the scientists began to fear that they were not just studying a fire. They were standing at the edge of something much larger, much more terrifying. Something that would change the course of history if they dared to understand it. But their questions were left unanswered. The flames continued to burn hotter, more insistent than ever. The team had tried everything. Now, they realized they were not the ones in control of this fire. Something else was. And just as they were beginning to lose hope of ever solving this mystery, something strange began to happen. The fire, which had been burning steadily for decades, began to shift in ways no one could predict. The flames, which had once seemed static and contained, now began to move. They seemed to have a will of their own. In that moment, the team realized the truth. The fire was not just a natural disaster. It was a warning, and something ancient was stirring beneath the surface of the Karakum desert, just waiting to be unleashed. The door to hell had opened, and now it was closing in on them. For decades, the door to hell has burned relentlessly, but the fire is not just a physical phenomenon. It is a harbinger of something far older, far darker than anyone could have imagined. In the barren, windswept expanse of Turkmenistan's Karakum Desert, where the sand stretches endlessly into the horizon, this fiery chasm is seen by many as the Earth's portal to another world, a world that was never meant to be disturbed. But as the flames continue to rage and the mystery deepens, the question arises, is the fire truly an accident, or is it a curse, a punishment for the greed of those who dare to dig too deep? This is not just a story about a fire. It is about the whispers of an ancient curse that has echoed through the region for centuries. And these whispers speak of a much older truth, one that the modern world has yet to uncover. For centuries, the people who lived around the Karakum Desert have been wary of the land's secrets. Their ancestors told stories, tales of a time long ago when the earth itself opened, unleashing an evil far beyond human comprehension. These legends spoke of a terrible fire, one that could never be quenched, one that would burn for eternity, and of a gate, an infernal door that should never have been opened. The fire that now rages in the Karakum Desert was not just an accident. In the hearts of the local people, it is seen as the result of an ancient wrong, a transgression against the earth that had been sealed away for millennia. According to the old stories, there were once people who lived in this land, people who were powerful and knowledgeable in ways that modern men could never understand. They built great cities, and some say they made bargains with forces beyond this world, forces that should have been left alone. The tale begins long before the Soviets ever drilled into the earth. Long ago, the desert was not a barren wasteland, but a thriving landscape filled with cities, temples, and ancient wonders. The people who lived here were said to have been both wise and terrifying. They knew the secrets of the earth, the secrets of fire, and most importantly, the secrets of the unknown. But there was a price to pay for such knowledge. According to the legend, the people of the ancient cities made a pact with an entity from beyond the earth, a being of fire and darkness, a force that existed in another realm, one that was not meant to touch this world. They opened a door, a gate, that allowed the fire to come through. But it came at a terrible cost. The earth, scorched by the flames, cracked open. The people's cities were swallowed by the desert, their knowledge lost, and their existence erased from history. The desert became a place of mourning and regret, and over time, the flames that had ravaged the land slowly died down. But the door that had been opened, the door to hell, was never fully closed. It lay dormant beneath the earth, waiting for someone to stir it again. That is where the story of the fire truly begins. The Soviets, with their ambition for control over natural resources, dug too deeply. They didn't know what lay beneath the surface. They didn't know what had been buried there for so long. In 1971, when the drilling crew struck a gas pocket in the earth, they unleashed more than just a fire. They unknowingly opened a door that had remained sealed for centuries. The flames that erupted were not simply the result of a gas leak. They were the fire that had once scorched the ancient cities. The door, long dormant, was now open once again. As the fire raged, local villagers, those whose families had lived near the desert for generations, began to speak of a curse. They spoke of the fire not as an accident, but as a manifestation of the ancient wrong that had been committed by their ancestors. It was as though the earth had remembered the pact made long ago and had begun to punish those who had disturbed its eternal secret. And so, the mystery deepened. The more the scientists tried to explain the fire, the more the local lore seemed to come to life. The ancient curse that had been buried with the desert cities was awakening. The fire, which had once been a tool of ancient power, was now an unstoppable force, a physical manifestation of the earth's anger, a punishment for the greed of those who sought to exploit it. But why hadn't the fire been extinguished? Why was it that no matter what measures were taken, no matter how much water, foam, or chemicals were poured onto the flames, the fire continued to burn hotter and hotter? There were no simple answers. The theories that tried to explain it, gas pockets, geological anomalies, seemed to falter as the fire grew. There were no scientific explanations that could account for the intensity and duration of the flames. As the fire raged on, the boundary between myth and reality began to blur. What if this fire was not just a natural disaster? What if it was a warning, a signal that something older, something far darker, was stirring beneath the surface? What if the fire was not simply burning gas, but feeding on something much older, something that had been sealed away for centuries? The villagers believed that the fire was not just a result of human greed, it was a punishment. The desert, in their minds, was alive with spirits, with forces that had been here long before man walked the earth. And when those forces were disturbed, they awakened. The fire was not simply an accident of geology. It was a manifestation of something far more powerful, a reminder that there were forces beyond human understanding that could never be tamed. But even as the flames raged, the truth remained elusive. Some said that the fire was not merely burning, it was calling to something. What or who was it calling to? And what would happen when the fire finally consumed everything in its path? For years, the fire remained a mystery, a curse that refused to be understood. Scientists tried to explain it with logic, but the more they investigated, the more they realized that the fire had a life of its own. They found no answers in the soil, no new sources of gas. Theories were proposed, but none seemed to fit. The fire was growing hotter, more intense, as if it were being fueled by something outside the realm of normal science. And then came the rumors. Some claimed to have seen figures near the fire, figures that didn't belong to any living creatures. They spoke of shadows moving around the flames, figures that seemed to watch from the distance, as though they were waiting for something. The fire was not just a fire, it was the doorway, the gateway to another world. But what lay beyond? The legend of the door to hell began to take on new meaning. The fire was no longer just an accident. It was something much more. It was a curse, an ancient force that had been awakened by the careless actions of those who had drilled too deeply into the earth. But the question remained, what would happen next? Was this the beginning of something far worse? According to one version of the legend, the fire was not an accident at all. It had been opened intentionally, a door that had been sealed for centuries, waiting to be disturbed. The ancient civilizations that once lived in the desert had known of the door, but they had kept it sealed, knowing that its power was too great to be unleashed. But now, it had been opened, and no one could close it. The fire was not just a warning, it was a signal that the earth was ready to take back what had been stolen from it. And no matter how much mankind tried to stop it, the fire would burn until the door was closed again. But the truth was, no one knew how to close it, or even if it could be closed. The fire had been unleashed, and now, no one could predict what would happen next. As the flames continued to burn, the legend lived on. Some said that the fire would eventually consume everything in its path. Others whispered that the flames were a sign that the world was about to change, that the ancient door to hell had been opened, and the time for mankind was drawing to a close. But one thing was certain. The fire was not just an accident. It was a curse, and the door to hell had been opened. Now, the question remains, who or what opened it? And is it already too late to close the door once more? The answers, like the flames, continue to burn. In the heart of the Karakum desert, where the sands stretch to infinity and the sun beats down relentlessly, there exists a fire that has burned for over 5 decades, known to the world as the door to hell. It is a flaming chasm that has puzzled scientists, captivated adventurers, and, most unsettling of all, been met with an eerie silence by the very government of Turkmenistan. The flames rise ever higher, and yet, for reasons unknown, the fire has not only been allowed to continue, it has been largely ignored by those who should have been responsible for controlling it. Why? The fire began in 1971, when a team of Soviet engineers, drilling for natural gas in the vast, desolate expanse of the desert, struck a pocket of gas that exploded, igniting a fire that has never stopped. To most, this would have been considered a disaster, one that demanded urgent attention and containment. And yet, the Turkmenistan government, even after independence from the Soviet Union, never seemed to take significant action. Why? What kept them from addressing a crisis that could have had far-reaching consequences? Was there more to the story than just an accidental fire? From the very beginning, it was clear that the situation was far from ordinary. The fire didn't just burn, it raged. The flames roared, sending columns of smoke into the air, visible for miles across the desert. It wasn't just a small fire that could be extinguished with a bit of effort. No, this was something else entirely. The heat was unbearable, and the fire only seemed to grow, fed by the unseen pockets of gas beneath the surface. Even the most advanced firefighting techniques and scientific methods failed to put it out. The team's plan to let the fire burn itself out seemed, at first, like a logical decision. But years went by, then decades, and still, the fire raged on. No intervention, no public explanation, nothing. Over time, a strange sense of disquiet began to spread across the country. Why hadn't the government taken stronger measures? What could possibly be the reasoning behind their reluctance to address the situation? As the fire continued to burn, Turkmenistan's government remained silent. Too silent, perhaps. Many began to wonder, were they hiding something? Were they covering up something far darker, far more mysterious than a simple drilling accident? As international interest grew, the Turkmenistan government's silence only deepened. The door to hell became an object of fascination for the world. Scientists, historians, adventurers, and tourists all flocked to the site, each seeking answers to the mystery of the eternal flames. Yet, no one could truly understand why the government didn't appear more concerned. In fact, they seemed to be avoiding the issue altogether, offering only vague statements when pressed. The fire was just a natural occurrence, they claimed. It would be dealt with when the time was right. But the longer the fire burned, the more unsettling this explanation seemed. And so, the mystery grew. There were rumors, whispers among the locals, and even within government circles, that the fire was not just a random disaster, nor a mere accident. Could the fire have been something more? Something intentionally left to burn, perhaps? Over time, more disturbing stories began to surface. What if the fire wasn't an accident at all, but a result of something much darker, something that the government was unwilling to acknowledge? It was said that the government knew more than they were letting on, that they had always known more. In fact, some claimed that the fire, now burning for over 50 years, had actually been expected. But how could that be? And why would the government allow such a disaster to continue unabated? Was there something they were trying to protect? Something they didn't want the world to know? Were they hiding a secret so immense, so dangerous, that would shatter everything the world knew about this place? The answer seemed impossible to find. The government, though, had been far from transparent. It was rumored that within the walls of the Turkmenistan government, there were officials who believed the fire had a greater significance, something that went beyond mere natural gas. Perhaps they thought the fire wasn't just a fire, it was a gate to something far older, far darker than anything they could comprehend. And it wasn't something that could be controlled. It wasn't something that could be extinguished. There were stories, rumors of a secret government group, one dedicated not to stopping the fire, but to studying it. What was the true nature of the flames? Some claimed that the fire had been intentionally left to burn as a way to keep something locked away beneath the earth. Others whispered of ancient knowledge, of a time when the earth itself had been home to forces that should never have been disturbed. Could this be the real reason the government stayed silent? Were they trying to prevent the world from learning the truth about the door to hell? Was there something beneath the fire that they feared? Something that, if discovered, would change everything? There were rumors that some within the government knew exactly what lay beneath the surface of the desert. A few even said that a group of scientists had stumbled upon something ancient in the early days of the fire. They spoke of strange symbols discovered near the fire, symbols that weren't just geological formations or natural markings. They looked too deliberate, too constructed, and it was said that the government had worked tirelessly to suppress these findings, making sure that no one outside of their circle ever learned of them. But why? What could be so dangerous about these discoveries? As time passed, the whispers of a cover-up grew louder. Some insiders claimed that the government was actively suppressing information about the fire, keeping it hidden from both the public and the international community. But what was the government really hiding? Was it simply the desire to avoid embarrassment over the uncontrolled disaster? Or was there something more, something far darker and more sinister that they were desperate to keep from the world? And then, as the fire continued to burn, a chilling revelation surfaced. Someone from inside the government had tried to warn the people. They had tried to bring the truth to light, to expose what was really happening with the fire, to reveal the dangers that lay beneath the surface of the desert. But the truth was silenced, swiftly and without mercy. It began with an anonymous source, a government official who, in secret, began leaking information about the fire to international media. They provided details about the hidden research, about the secret group studying the flames, about the knowledge they had uncovered regarding the true origins of the fire and the ancient forces beneath the desert. But before they could reveal everything, the source vanished, disappeared without a trace. Some say they were silenced permanently. What had they known? What had they been about to expose? The government's response was swift and brutal. All investigations into the disappearance were quickly suppressed, and the media that had been involved in breaking the story were threatened. The silence surrounding the door to hell grew even more oppressive. What could they have been trying to cover up? What was the real reason that the government had refused to address the fire, to allow it to burn, to fester like an open wound in the heart of the desert? The unanswered questions loomed larger with each passing year. Was the fire truly an accident? Or was it the result of something far darker? Was the government protecting the world from the truth? Or was there something so terrifying, so dangerous, that they simply couldn't risk revealing it? The silence only deepened the mystery. The door to hell continued to burn, its flames flickering in the desert night. And as the years stretched on, it became clear that the secrets surrounding the fire were far more profound than anyone had dared to imagine. The question remained, what was beneath the surface of the earth, deep within the desert's heart? What was it that the Turkmenistan government was so desperately trying to hide? As the flames reached higher into the sky, one truth became undeniable. The government's silence wasn't just about a fire. It was about what the fire was hiding, and what they feared would be uncovered if the flames ever stopped. The door to hell may never be closed, but its secrets? Those might be far more dangerous than the fire itself. Beneath the relentless heat of the Karakum desert in Turkmenistan, the door to hell continues to burn. The flames have raged for over 50 years, and while the world knows it as a geologic accident, a catastrophic explosion of natural gas, a much darker and more mysterious possibility looms in the shadows. Could this fiery chasm be linked to a civilization lost to time? An ancient, forgotten people whose secrets lie buried beneath the scorched earth? As the world has tried to explain away the fire with logic and science, some have dared to consider the unthinkable. The fire could be tied to something older, something beyond mere geology. What if the flames are not simply the result of human greed, but the consequence of a forbidden pact made long ago? A pact with gods or forces beyond human understanding that should have remained sealed in the forgotten corners of time? Theories have come and gone, but one thing remains true. The fire, the door to hell, is not just an anomaly. It is a mystery, one that no amount of modern science has been able to fully explain. And some are beginning to suspect that the fire has been burning far longer than anyone realizes. What if the fire is not a modern accident, but the echo of something ancient, a fire that has been burning since the dawn of civilization? The first hint that this might be true came not from a team of scientists or engineers, but from a small group of archaeologists who ventured to the desert to explore the area around the fire. As the world fixated on the scientific explanations for the flames, these archaeologists dug deeper into the earth, searching for signs of what lay beneath the surface. What they uncovered was far beyond anything they had expected. The first artifact they found was a stone tablet, old and weathered, its surface etched with strange markings that didn't resemble any known language. The tablet was uncovered near the edge of the fiery crater, as though it had been waiting there, buried for centuries. The symbols on the stone were cryptic, but one thing was clear. They spoke of a time long before the modern world had even begun to take shape. The tablet, the archaeologists realized, could be from a civilization that had existed thousands of years ago, perhaps even longer. At first, the discovery was treated as a curiosity, a relic of the past. But as the team continued to dig, their findings became more and more unsettling. Nearby, they uncovered the remains of what appeared to be an ancient structure, its foundations buried deep in the sand. The architecture was unlike anything they had seen before. It was as if the people who built it had access to knowledge or technology that was far ahead of their time. As the dig site expanded, the archaeologists found more artifacts, pieces of jewelry, tools, and pottery. Each object was more intricate than the last, suggesting a culture that was not only advanced, but one that possessed a deep understanding of fire in the earth. The fire, they soon realized, wasn't just an accident. It was a connection, a link to something older, something that had been lost to time, but had never been truly extinguished. The deeper the archaeologists dug, the more they uncovered. Strange symbols carved into the stones, markings that seemed to pulse with an energy that was almost palpable. It wasn't just that these people had lived here. It was as if they had guarded something that had been kept hidden beneath the desert sands for millennia. Could it be possible that the fire was connected to these ancient people? What had they known about the earth, about fire, about the forces beneath the surface that modern science had yet to comprehend? The more they uncovered, the more the archaeologists began to speculate about what lay beneath the surface. Some believed that this was a civilization that had made a pact with dark forces, a deal struck with gods or creatures from beyond the earth. They spoke of an ancient ritual gone wrong, a ritual that had unleashed a fire that could never be extinguished. This fire, some believed, was not just natural. It was supernatural, a manifestation of an ancient curse that had been bound to the land. As the team delved deeper into the site, they uncovered even more disturbing evidence. They found a series of underground chambers, their walls adorned with the same strange symbols that had appeared on the tablet. These chambers seemed to have been designed for something or someone. The air inside was thick, heavy with the scent of something ancient, something that shouldn't have been disturbed. But it wasn't just the symbols or the chambers that left the archaeologists feeling uneasy. There was something else, something hidden in the darkness, something that felt alive. As they explored the chambers, they came across strange markings on the walls, scratches, as though something had clawed at the stone. But these weren't just random markings. No, they were deliberate, as if someone or something had left them behind on purpose. One of the archaeologists, a seasoned researcher who had spent his life studying ancient civilizations, began to voice his growing concern. He had seen many things in his career, but there was something about this site that unsettled him. The fire that raged in the desert, the strange artifacts, the markings on the walls. It was as if the ancient people had known something that had been buried and forgotten for thousands of years. And now it was awakening again. He suggested that the fire might not just be an accident, nor a simple geological anomaly. What if the fire was tied to this ancient civilization? What if it was a part of an ancient ritual, a ritual that had gone wrong and had set something in motion that could never be undone? The fire, he proposed, wasn't just a natural disaster. It was a manifestation of something that had been sealed away, a consequence of a forbidden pact that had been struck long ago. The deeper the archaeologists dug, the more questions arose. The artifacts they had uncovered, the symbols they had found, the strange energy that seemed to emanate from the site. It all pointed to something that could no longer be ignored. Was the fire just a random accident? Or was it part of a much larger, much darker mystery? As the team worked late into the night, trying to piece together the clues they had uncovered, one archaeologist made a chilling discovery. Buried deep beneath the earth, in a hidden chamber that had remained untouched for centuries, he found a relic unlike anything he had ever seen. It was a statue, roughly humanoid in shape, but twisted, distorted. Its eyes seemed to follow him as he approached. The statue was made of an unknown material, one that seemed to shimmer in the dim light of the chamber. And it was this statue that gave him the most unsettling feeling. It wasn't just the strange features of the statue that bothered him. It was the energy that radiated from it. It was as if the statue was alive, as if it had been waiting for someone to discover it, to bring it back to the surface. The archaeologist couldn't shake the feeling that this was what had been hidden for so long. This was what the ancient civilization had been protecting, a force, a presence that had been buried and forgotten, and now it was being released. The fire, he realized, wasn't just a result of a gas leak. It was the awakening. The statue, the symbols, the strange artifacts, all of it pointed to a truth that no one was ready to face. The ancient civilization had been guarding something far darker than anyone could have imagined. And now, that darkness was stirring once again as the fire continued to burn in the heart of the Karakum desert. The archaeologists, shaken by their discovery, made their way back to the surface. As they emerged from the chamber, the air felt thick, as if something had changed, something had been set in motion. The fire, they realized, was not just a random disaster. It was the beginning of something that had been sealed away for millennia. The deeper they had dug, the more they had uncovered. And the more they uncovered, the more they realized that the fire, the door to hell, was not just a mystery. It was a warning that something ancient and powerful was being released once again. And now, no one knew how to stop it. The flames continued to burn, casting their eerie glow across the desert. But what lay beneath the fire was far darker than anyone had expected. The lost civilization, the pact with the gods, the forbidden ritual, all of it had been tied to the flames that burned in the Karakum desert. And now, as the archaeologists had uncovered, the fire was not just burning natural gas. It was burning the remnants of an ancient power, a power that no one understood, but one that might very well change the course of history. As the flames rose higher, one question remained. What had been awakened beneath the desert? And how much longer would the world be able to ignore the terrifying truth that lay beneath the fire? The deeper the archaeologists dug, the more the ancient secrets began to surface. And with them came a chilling realization. The fire was not just burning for fuel. It was burning for something far, far worse. Something that had been waiting for millennia to rise again. The winds of the Karakum desert howled, carrying with them the whispers of something ancient, something hidden deep beneath the burning earth. The door to hell, a fire that had raged for over 5 decades, had captivated the world's attention. But what lay beneath the flames? No one had dared to venture deep enough to uncover the true secrets of the desert. That was until the first expedition, a team of archaeologists, scientists, and adventurers, decided to dig below the surface. They came from across the globe, driven by a singular question. What was the source of the fire, and what lay beneath the ever-burning chasm? Theories swirled. Some believed it was simply a gas explosion gone awry. Others whispered of an ancient curse, a lost civilization, or even a portal to another world. The fire had burned for years, but it had never been properly studied. What if there was something more? What if the flames were not merely natural, but the result of something far more mysterious? The expedition began in the early hours of the morning. The crew set up camp just a few miles from the fire, their equipment ready, their minds filled with curiosity and apprehension. They had read the stories, studied the legends, but nothing could have prepared them for what they were about to discover. The first few days were filled with routine. A careful analysis of the fire's reach, tests of the surrounding soil, and geological surveys of the area. But the further they ventured, the more their excitement grew. There were subtle anomalies in the land, faint traces of something unusual buried under the shifting sands. It was then, on the 5th day of their exploration, that one of the lead archaeologists, Dr. Elena Morozov, made the first shocking discovery. As she and her team dug into the ground near the edge of the fire, they unearthed an oddly shaped stone. It was large, covered in dust and dirt, but as they cleared it away, they realized it wasn't just a random rock. The stone had intricate carvings on its surface, symbols that no one recognized. This wasn't something that belonged to the desert. It was too purposeful, too refined. "What is this?" Elena murmured to herself, her fingers tracing the strange markings. As the team gathered around, their eyes widened in disbelief. These carvings didn't resemble anything from the known history of the region. They were unlike anything they had seen before. The symbols seemed to swirl and pulse as though they held a hidden meaning, something that was beyond the capacity of the world they understood. But the stone was only the beginning. On the following day, the team found something even more unsettling: the remnants of an underground structure, partially buried in the sand. It was a massive stone wall that stretched deep into the earth, its surface adorned with the same mysterious symbols. The structure was not made of natural stone. It was too precise, too crafted, suggesting that this was the work of an advanced civilization. And the strange thing was, it shouldn't have been here. Who would build such a structure in the heart of a desert, so far removed from any known city or settlement? The more the team uncovered, the more the landscape began to shift. This wasn't just an accidental find. It was the ruins of something ancient, something that shouldn't have existed in a place like this. They had come to study the fire, but now they were beginning to realize that this was no ordinary sight. They had stumbled upon the remnants of an ancient civilization, long forgotten and buried beneath the sands for reasons that no one could understand. The structure seemed to beckon them deeper. As they continued to dig, they uncovered more of the underground complex. The walls were lined with strange, undecipherable inscriptions, and the air was thick with an oppressive energy. The deeper they went, the heavier the atmosphere grew. The team's initial enthusiasm began to shift to unease. There was something wrong here, something that didn't belong. As night fell, the temperature in the desert dropped dramatically. The expedition team set up camp near the entrance of the structure, hoping to continue their work the next morning. But something fell off. The winds began to pick up, carrying with them a faint hum, a low vibration that seemed to come from the earth itself. At first, it was dismissed as a natural occurrence, perhaps the sound of the wind moving through cracks in the stone. But as the hours passed, the hum grew louder, deeper. It was no longer just the wind. It was something else. Dr. Morozov and her team decided to investigate. They ventured back into the structure, following the eerie hum deeper into the maze of stone. The closer they got to the heart of the complex, the more intense the vibrations became. It was as though the very earth beneath their feet was alive, thrumming with energy. The walls of the structure seemed to pulse in time with the hum, and the air grew colder. And then they found it. In the center of the complex, they uncovered a large, circular chamber. In the middle of the room was an altar-like structure made of black stone. It was covered in more of the strange symbols, and at the center of the altar was a dark, jagged hole that seemed to lead down into the depths of the earth. The hum had intensified, vibrating the ground beneath their feet, and a chill ran down their spines. Elena stood at the edge of the altar, peering into the abyss below. There was something about the hole that felt wrong, something that made her blood run cold. She could feel it deep in her bones, the sense that whatever lay beneath was not meant to be disturbed. The structure, she realized, was not just a building, it was a gateway. A gateway to what? Before they could investigate further, the hum reached a crescendo, and a massive tremor shook the ground. The team staggered, grabbing onto the walls for balance. Dust and debris rained down from the ceiling. The rumbling lasted for only a few seconds, but in that brief moment, everything felt different, more alive. As the tremor subsided, the hum faded, but the air was thick with a sense of anticipation, as though something had awakened. "We need to get out of here," one of the team members, Dr. Xavier, said, his voice shaking with fear. "This place isn't just a ruin. It's alive." Reluctantly, the team retreated from the chamber, their nerves on edge. But as they reached the entrance of the structure, something caught their attention. They heard something, footsteps. No, it couldn't be. They were alone. The hum had stopped, and the vibrations had ceased. Yet, there was again, faint at first, but growing louder. It was coming from within the structure. The team stopped dead in their tracks. Elena's heart raced. "What is that?" The sound was unmistakable now. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, echoing through the dark halls of the underground complex. Someone, or something, was moving within the ruins. "Did anyone else hear that?" Elena asked, her voice barely a whisper. The team nodded in silence, their faces pale with fear. They had just uncovered a buried structure, an ancient civilization long lost to time, and now, something was inside. The very ruins that had been dormant for centuries seemed to be alive, and it wasn't just the hum. There was something else moving through the halls, something that shouldn't be there. They had come to uncover the secrets of the fire, but now they were faced with a far greater mystery. The ruins weren't just abandoned. They were waiting for something or someone to enter. The footsteps grew louder, closer. It was as though something or someone was emerging from the depths of the earth itself. "What should we do?" one of the team members asked, his voice tight with fear. "Get out, now," Elena ordered. But as they turned to flee, the ground beneath them shook once again, harder this time. The air grew thick with tension, and then, from the depths of the structure, came a sound that none of them would ever forget. A low growl, something primal, something ancient. The team froze. The growl grew louder, closer, and then, just as they thought they could run no more, a shadow moved in the darkness of the chamber, a figure tall and distorted, stepping toward them from the very heart of the structure. The figure's eyes glowed with an eerie, unnatural light. The door to hell was not just a fire. It was a gateway, and something had come through. The team stood frozen in terror, unable to move. Whatever was coming from within the structure was no longer just a legend. It was a reality, and it was closer than they had ever imagined. What had they uncovered in the depths of the desert? And who, or what, was now following them out of the darkness? The answers, it seemed, were more terrifying than anyone could have predicted. For 50 years, the flames of the door to hell in Turkmenistan have burned without end. What began as an industrial accident, the result of a Soviet drilling operation gone wrong, had slowly grown into one of the world's most baffling mysteries. A fire that refused to die, the heat rising year after year, becoming not just a symbol of nature's fury, but of something more ancient, more dangerous. But something had changed. The first signs were subtle, hard to notice at first. The heat, always unbearable, grew more intense. The fire, which had been confined to a specific area for decades, began to spread. It was as if the flames were hungry, searching for something beyond their familiar boundaries. At first, only a few noticed the difference. The scientists and researchers who had returned to study the fire, attempting to find a way to contain it, to understand it. They stood at the edges of the desert, watching as the flames licked higher into the sky, as if they were reaching for something. Then, the tremor started. Small at first, just a vibration underfoot that barely registered. But as the days passed, the tremors grew more violent, shaking the ground with a force that had not been felt in the area before. It was as if the earth itself was trembling, as though the fire was not just burning, but awakening. Something was stirring beneath the surface, and it was not content to remain hidden any longer. A new expedition, more cautious and more prepared, had been dispatched to investigate the escalating fire. The team included experts in geology, archaeology, and even folklore, as the connection between the fire and the ancient legends had become impossible to ignore. They arrived with one primary goal in mind: to find out what was fueling the flames and what could possibly be causing them to grow more violent. The moment they arrived, they could feel the change. The fire, which had always been an ominous presence on the horizon, now seemed more alive. It was no longer just a fire, it was something else. The heat was so intense that the very air around the fire shimmered, distorting everything in its wake. It felt as though the flames themselves were alive, watching them, pulling them closer. But it wasn't just the fire. As they approached the site, the landscape itself seemed different. The ground was cracked, as though the earth had been pushed to its breaking point. The air was thick, heavy with an energy that the team had never encountered before. It was more than just a geological oddity. It felt like something otherworldly. The team began their investigation with the same methods they had used during their previous expeditions: geological surveys, temperature readings, and mapping of the surrounding area. But as they ventured closer to the edge of the crater, they realized that the fire was no longer confined to the hole they had studied so carefully in the past. It was spreading, not just horizontally, but vertically, rising from the earth like a living creature reaching out, as though trying to break free from its confines. They found something shocking on the periphery of the fire: a series of deep fissures in the earth, blackened with soot. These cracks extended outward from the original crater, far beyond the boundaries of where the fire had been. The flames were not just spreading. They were breaching the surface, seeping into the land like an infection. "Something's wrong," whispered Dr. Elena Morozov, the lead geologist on the team, as she examined the cracks. "This isn't just the fire expanding. It's as though it's being fed by something beneath the earth. It's alive." Her words hung in air as the rest of the team looked around in unease. The fire wasn't just burning gas, it was drawing something from the earth. Whatever lay beneath the surface was now making its presence known, feeding the flames. And it was clear to them now that the fire was more than just a natural disaster. It was part of something much larger, much older. They had barely begun to understand the scope of the problem when the ground shook beneath their feet, harder than before. The tremors rattled their equipment, and for a moment, they feared that the ground would crack open entirely, swallowing them whole. But it wasn't the ground that shook the hardest. It was the fire itself. The flames, already raging out of control, flickered in a strange, unnatural way. They twisted and danced, their movement erratic, as if they were being guided by an unseen force. It was no longer just a fire, it was a signal. The fire was trying to communicate, trying to reach out like a hand from another world. The team hurriedly set up their equipment to analyze the changes in the fire's behavior. Dr. Morozov's pulse quickened as she watched the readings spike off the charts. The temperature around the fire was climbing to unprecedented levels, and the heat radiating from the flames was no longer something that could be contained. The fire was uncontrollable. That night, as the team sat around their camp, the tension was palpable. No one spoke much. The fire in the distance cast an eerie glow over the camp, and the crackling of the flames felt almost alive. But it wasn't just the fire that kept them on edge. There was something else in the air, something unspoken, like a dark presence watching them from the shadows. It was then that they began to hear it. At first, it was nothing more than a low hum, a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. The sound was low and rhythmic, as though it was coming from beneath the surface, beneath the fire. The hum grew louder, and the air around them seemed to thicken with an otherworldly energy. "What is that?" one of the team members whispered, his voice trembling. Dr. Morozov stood up, her face pale. "It's not just the fire," she said quietly. "There's something beneath it, something alive." But before they could react, the hum reached a deafening crescendo, and the ground beneath their feet shook violently. The flames erupted higher, casting flickering shadows across the desert. The fire, which had been growing steadily, now seemed to roar, surging in a way that was unnatural. It felt as though the flames were being summoned, like something was pulling them from below, urging them upward. The team stumbled back from the fire, but their escape was interrupted by another, more terrifying sound. A crackling noise came from the fissures in the earth, and before they could react, a massive tremor tore through the ground, splitting the desert wide open. The flames surged, sending a wave of heat that nearly knocked them off their feet. "We need to leave," Dr. Morozov shouted, panic rising in her voice. But as they turned to flee, something caught their attention. From the deep fissures in the earth, a dark shape emerged, rising from the cracks like an ancient serpent. It was not a creature, they soon realized, but a massive structure, a long-buried ruin that had been awakened by the fire. The structure, covered in ancient symbols and dark markings, loomed ominously over them. It was as if the fire had opened it, allowing it to break free from its prison beneath the earth. Dr. Morozov's mind raced. Could this be the source of the fire? The door mentioned in the ancient legends? Was this the true portal that had been sealed away, buried beneath the desert for centuries? A wave of dread washed over her as the team backed away from the ruins. The fire wasn't just a random disaster. It was connected to something far darker, a force that had been sealed away long ago. And now it was returning. The flames, once contained and manageable, were now spreading with a purpose. The fire had become a portal, a rift between worlds. And whatever lay on the other side of that portal was awakening. As the flames burned hotter, the team realized that they were no longer just facing a fire. They were facing something far more terrifying. The fire wasn't just a phenomenon of nature. It was a gateway, an opening to another world, a world that had been sealed away by ancient forces long before the modern world had taken shape. And now, the gateway was open. But as the fire continued to burn and the ruins rose from the earth, the most chilling thought of all crept into their minds. If this was a portal, then what was waiting on the other side? And how long would it be before it reached through and took back what had been stolen from it? The flames continued to roar, but the true terror had only just begun. The fire in Turkmenistan's Karakum desert had raged for over 50 years, an unrelenting force that had baffled the world. But now something had changed. The flames weren't just burning, they were growing. What had once been an eerie and inexplicable phenomenon had evolved into something far more terrifying, more unpredictable, and more alive. It wasn't just the fire that had started to behave strangely. The very air around it was thick with a sense of presence, a presence that was watching, waiting, and growing ever closer. Scientists, archaeologists, and adventurers who had previously trekked to the site with an academic curiosity now found themselves driven by a mounting sense of unease. What had once been a spectacle of fire had become an unsettling enigma. The flames burned hotter, casting an orange glow that painted the night sky in eerie hues. It was no longer just an out-of-control blaze. It had become a gateway to something unknown. It began with the lights. The first signs were subtle, a flicker in the sky, a distant glimmer, nothing that could easily be explained. As the days wore on, the lights became more distinct. The first group to witness them thought they were seeing things. A few lights, too bright and too still to be stars, seemed to hover just above the horizon, stationary yet unnervingly close to the flames. They weren't planes, there was no noise, no movement, nothing that suggested they were any earthly object. Instead, they flickered in and out of existence, always just at the edge of the fire's reach. As night fell, more lights appeared, swirling in patterns that made no sense. They would flash across the sky, dancing around the fire in ways that seemed purposeful. Some researchers tried to document them, setting up cameras and recording equipment. But every time they pointed their lenses toward the strange lights, they would vanish, as though the moment they were observed, they faded from existence. At first, it was just the lights. Then came the noises. Strange, unexplainable sounds that would rise from the desert, echoing through the night. It started with low hums, almost inaudible at first, but soon escalated into something more. The hum grew into a constant, deep vibration that seemed to emanate from the fire itself, from the very earth beneath their feet. The vibrations were not just physical, they were felt. It was as if the sound was resonating in the bones, reverberating through the chest. Then, one night, the whispers began. At first, they were faint, barely discernible. The team thought it was the wind, the fire, or even the desert's natural sounds playing tricks on them. But as the days passed, the whispers grew louder, clearer, more distinct. Words began to form, not in any language they knew, but in guttural tones, almost human, but not quite. The whispers seemed to float on the wind, carried across the desert, slipping through the cracks of the fire. There was something eerie about them, something deeply unsettling. Some of the team members, now beginning to doubt their own sanity, tried to dismiss it as hallucinations. But those who had been in the desert long enough knew that what they were hearing wasn't just the sound of nature. The whispers carried with them a sense of urgency, of something alive beneath the earth, something that was calling to them. It was Elena Morozov, the lead geologist, who first proposed a theory that no one wanted to hear. She gathered the team together one night after an intense day of studying the fire, her face pale and her voice tense with fear. "I don't think this is just a geological anomaly," she said, her words shaking. "The fire, it's not just burning gas. It's something more. It's connected to something that was here before we ever came. And I think it's drawing something to it." Her eyes scanned the faces of the team members. "Something is coming through," she whispered, the words barely audible. The team was silent for a moment. It was as if the desert itself had listened to her words and held its breath, waiting for a response. Elena continued. "The fire, the lights, the whispers, it's all part of the same thing. We're not just dealing with a natural disaster. We've opened something ancient, and now it's trying to reach us." It was a theory that no one wanted to believe, but in their hearts, they all knew it was true. The fire was more than just flames. It was a doorway, a gateway to something beyond this world, something that had been locked away beneath the earth for millennia. And whatever had been sealed inside, that dark place was awakening. As the team grappled with this realization, the situation only grew worse. The strange lights that had danced around the fire for days now began to move with more purpose. They would appear in clusters, gathering over the flames, their movements erratic and quick, as if they were responding to some unseen command. The hums and vibrations became more pronounced, more aggressive. The whispers that had once felt distant now seemed to swirl around them, filling the air with an energy that made the hairs on the back of their necks stand on end. They were no longer alone. The temperature around the fire grew unbearable. The heat from the flames reached new, impossible levels. The team could feel the sweat pouring from their bodies as the air thickened with an unnatural heaviness. There was a force in the air, an energy that pressed down on them, stifling their breath and making every movement feel sluggish and distant. They had to act quickly, or they would be consumed, not just by the fire, but by whatever unseen force was drawing closer. One night, as the team stood on the edge of the crater, watching the fire and the strange lights, a lone member of the group saw something that sent a shock through the rest of them. Dr. Xavier, a young researcher who had joined the team only a few weeks prior, turned pale as he stared into the fire, his eyes wide with terror. "I saw something," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the wind. The others gathered around him, their faces filled with concern. "What did you see?" Elena asked, trying to keep her voice steady. Xavier shook his head, his hand trembling. It wasn't a shadow. It was a figure. He paused, his eyes still wide with disbelief. Tall, shadowy, not entirely human. It moved in the flames, just watching. For a moment, the team was silent. "You're sure?" Elena asked, her voice hoarse. He nodded, his face still pale. "I saw it, Elena. It was standing in the fire, watching me. And then, just before I turned away, it moved." The words hung in the air like a curse. Moved. The idea of someone, emerging from the flames was too terrible to consider. But if Xavier was right, if something was in there, waiting to break through the fire, then everything they had believed about this fire, about the door to hell, would be turned upside down. As they gathered their thoughts and tried to process what they had just heard, another tremor shook the ground. This time, the tremor was different. It wasn't just the earth beneath their feet shifting. It was the fire itself responding to something. The flames leapt higher, faster, as if drawn toward a new source of energy, pulling everything in its path. The team backed away from the crater, fear in their eyes. They had not just uncovered an ancient civilization or a natural gas leak. They had opened a door to something not of this world. What if the fire is more than just a gateway? Elena asked, her voice trembling with the weight of the revelation. What if it's a portal and whatever's on the other side wants to come through? And as if to answer her question, the air around them grew still. The whispering had stopped. The lights had gone dark. But there, just on the horizon, something emerged from the flames, something tall, shadowy, and not entirely human. They stood frozen, their breaths caught in their throats, as the figure from the fire slowly stepped toward them, its form shifting and warping in the light. The flames crackled louder than ever, and in the distance a low growl echoed across the desert, a sound that wasn't of this world. The fire had awakened, and whatever had been lying dormant within it was now breaking free. The team realized in that moment that they had crossed a threshold. They were no longer mere observers of the door to hell. They had opened it, and whatever was waiting beyond the flames had begun to emerge. What was the figure? What was it here for? And how much longer could they stand before they too were consumed by the forces they had unknowingly unleashed? The answers were waiting beyond the flames, and the team had no choice but to face what was coming. The fire in Turkmenistan's Karakum desert had become a legend. It had burned for over 5 decades, an eternal blaze, a mystery that seemed impossible to explain. For years, scientists, archaeologists, and adventurers had tried to study it, to uncover the truth behind its existence. But every answer led to more questions. Theories ranged from geological accidents to supernatural forces, and the flames continued to grow hotter, more intense, feeding off the earth itself. But the most chilling thought of all had emerged. What if the fire wasn't just a natural disaster? What if it was a gateway? As the fire raged on, a growing sense of urgency surrounded the expedition teams and experts who continued to study the site. Something was happening beneath the earth, something that no one could fully understand. And now, more than ever, the search for answers was becoming a race against time. Could anyone, help them uncover the truth? The situation had escalated beyond the realm of conventional science. As the fire began to stretch its fiery tendrils farther, researchers, scientists, and even paranormal experts were drawn to the site. The world was watching, waiting for someone to explain what was happening. But with each passing day, the answers became more elusive and the stakes grew higher. What could be causing this? Was it simply a natural disaster, a geological phenomenon? Or is there something much darker at play? Dr. Elena Morozov, the lead geologist who had spent years studying the fire, was no longer sure what to believe. She had witnessed firsthand the strange occurrences, the flickering lights in the sky, the unexplainable hums that vibrated through the desert, the eerie whispers that seemed to echo on the wind. She had always been a scientist, someone who relied on facts and data, but even she was beginning to suspect that this was no ordinary fire. There was something more, something ancient, something that had been waiting for millennia to be discovered. As the fire burned, Elena's team reached out to the best minds in the world. A group of researchers from various fields arrived, each one bringing their own theory about the nature of the fire. Some believed it was merely a catastrophic accident, a natural gas explosion that had spiraled out of control. Others, particularly the paranormal experts, insisted that the fire was something much darker, something that had been sealed away by ancient forces. But amid the chaos of conflicting theories, one name kept resurfacing: a hidden group of scholars, an ancient order that some believed had long guarded the fire's secrets. Their knowledge was rumored to have been passed down through generations, a secret society dedicated to the protection of the site. For centuries, they had watched over the door to hell, ensuring that no one uncovered the forbidden truth that lay hidden beneath the surface of the earth. Were they real? And if they were, could they help explain the fire? Could they hold the key to understanding what was truly happening? Elena and her team grew increasingly desperate for answers, and in the midst of their search, they came across something strange, something that would change everything. It was in an ancient library, far from the fire's reach, where they found the manuscript. The library was dusty, forgotten by time, its shelves filled with tomes that seemed older than any written records they had ever encountered. It was hidden in the deepest corners of the desert, a place few had ever ventured to. The manuscript, old and brittle, was unlike anything they had seen before. The writing on its pages was in an ancient script, one that no modern language could decipher. But it wasn't just the writing that intrigued them. The manuscript was a record, a chronicle of the door to hell, a gateway that had been sealed long ago by the ancients. The pages of the manuscript hinted at something far darker than they had imagined. It spoke of an ancient pact made with a force beyond the earth, a force that had been imprisoned beneath the desert for centuries. This force, the manuscript claimed, was tied to the fire, the portal, and the fire itself was not just a rift between worlds, but a doorway to multiple realms. Realms beyond human comprehension. Realms where creatures and forces from another reality waited to emerge. Elena read the manuscript with trembling hands, the weight of its words settling over her like a curse. The legends had been true. This wasn't just a fire. It was a door, a rift between worlds that had been sealed long ago. And now, the fire was opening it again. But why? What was causing the fire to burn brighter, hotter? What had changed? As Elena and her team delved deeper into the manuscript, they uncovered more disturbing details. It was clear that the fire was not merely a random phenomenon. It had been intentionally created, or perhaps unleashed, by those who had known the secret of the ancient pact. And now, as the flames grew stronger, it was pulling something through, something that had been waiting in the shadows for millennia. But who, or what, was waiting beyond the flames? The manuscript didn't offer clear answers. Instead, it hinted at an ancient order of protectors, a group of scholars who had spent their lives watching over the gateway. Their mission was to ensure that the fire remained contained, that no one could break the seal that had been placed on the door to hell. The manuscript suggested that this order had known the truth all along, that the fire was not a natural disaster, but a warning, a sign that something far more dangerous was trying to break through. The team knew they couldn't ignore this. If the fire was truly a portal to another realm, to something far darker, they had to find a way to stop it. But how? The fire had burned for so long, and its intensity only seemed to grow stronger. The legend spoke of a key, a way to close the portal, but the manuscript didn't elaborate. The ancient order had left no clear instructions, no guide to help them understand the forces they were up against. It was as though the scholars had purposefully hidden the most important details, knowing that someday someone would come searching for answers, and that someone would have to find their own way. With no clear path forward, the team became more desperate. As they continued their research, more paranormal experts arrived at the site, each with their own theories. Some suggested that the fire was tied to the ancient gods of the desert, while others claimed it was a force from another dimension entirely. But no one could agree on the cause. Every theory seemed plausible, but nothing offered a concrete solution. And every attempt to analyze the fire only made the situation more unpredictable. One night, as the team sat around their camp near the fire, the atmosphere grew tense. The strange lights in the sky had returned, flickering above the flames in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. The hum that had resonated through the air began again, low and deep, reverberating through their bodies, sending chills down their spines. It was as though the fire itself was alive, reacting to their presence, drawing them closer to the heart of the mystery. Then, just as the team was beginning to lose hope, a new theory emerged. One of the paranormal experts, a man named Dr. Samuel Graves, claimed that the fire was not merely a doorway to another world. It was a link between multiple realms. This isn't just one gate, he explained, his voice trembling with excitement. It's a network, a web, and the fire is the central point, the anchor that connects them all. The team was stunned. If Dr. Graves was right, the fire wasn't just a portal. It was a hub, a central point connecting multiple dimensions. And if that was true, the implications were terrifying. The realms on the other side of the fire might not be empty. They could be inhabited by beings that were waiting for the right moment to break through. And that moment was now. As the team began to process this new theory, a sense of urgency gripped them. They couldn't wait any longer. The fire was not just a natural disaster, not just an ancient accident. It was a force, a power, and if they didn't act soon, whatever lay on the other side of the fire would come through. And there would be no stopping it. With the manuscript in hand, the team set out to find the key, the missing piece of the puzzle that could close the portal and stop the fire from consuming everything. But as they dug deeper into the desert, they realized something far more terrifying. The ancient order, the protectors of the gate, had left behind more than just knowledge. They had left behind a warning. And now it was up to Elena and her team to uncover what that warning truly meant. And as the flames continued to burn brighter, hotter, more violent than ever, the question remained: what lies beyond the door? And who, or what, was waiting to step through? The search for answers had only just begun, but time was running out. The fire had raged for over 5 decades, and now it was no longer just an isolated disaster. What had started as a simple drilling accident in the desolate Karakum desert had grown into a global crisis. The flames of the door to hell were no longer confined to a small patch of land. They had spread beyond control, leaping into new territories of the desert, threatening to consume everything in its path. The fire was no longer just a curiosity for the world. It was a disaster waiting to swallow the earth whole. It was an ancient, untamed force, and no one knew how to stop it. In the midst of this crisis, a team of researchers, scientists, and experts, those who had been closest to the fire, had come together for one final attempt. After years of futile attempts to contain it, they had realized that the time had come for drastic action. The door to hell was no longer just a natural phenomenon. It was a gateway to something far darker, far more dangerous than they had ever imagined. Something had been unleashed, something that had been waiting to return for centuries. And now, they were about to make one final, desperate attempt to close it. The fire had become more violent, more unpredictable. The heat was suffocating, even at distances where no one dared to approach. The team knew that the longer the fire burned, the more the door would stay open. The question that loomed over them was no longer how to stop the fire, but whether it was even possible. Could they really close the door? Or had it already gone too far, become too powerful to contain? Dr. Elena Morozov, the lead scientist who had spent years researching the fire, stood at the front of the team, her face a mixture of determination and fear. She had seen the fire grow from a small, strange phenomenon into a force of nature that had begun to consume the desert. She had studied it, theorized about it, and even made peace with the idea that no one would truly understand it. But the team was about to attempt something more dangerous than anything they had ever imagined, something that could either save the world or doom it forever. "We have to do this," Elena said, her voice hoarse. She knew the stakes had never been higher. The world was watching, waiting for the team to succeed or fail. But even as she spoke, doubts crept in her mind. Could they really close the door? Or had they awakened something they could never control? The plan was simple: a combination of advanced technology, engineering, and a deep understanding of the fire's behavior. The team had developed a complex system designed to smother the flames, cutting off the gas supply and forcing the fire to extinguish itself. They believed they could create a barrier, a net of containment, that would block the fire's access to fuel. But as they prepared to carry out their plan, one thing had become clear: this was not a simple fire. It was not just a matter of shutting it down. The deeper they delved into the mystery of the fire, the more they realized that it was tied to something much larger, something ancient. Legends, long dismissed as folklore, now seemed disturbingly real. They had discovered symbols carved into the stones around the fire, symbols that no modern civilization could explain. The fire, it seemed, was more than just the result of an industrial accident. It was the result of something that had been buried beneath the earth for centuries, something that was now being released. And so, the team's final plan to contain the fire was set into motion. The countdown began as they prepared to implement their strategy, but as they moved closer to the fire, the tension in the air grew palpable. They knew they were about to do something that could have unimaginable consequences. Would they succeed in closing the door to hell? Or would they release something even darker? The first step of the plan involved sealing off the area surrounding the fire. Huge walls of reinforced concrete were erected to contain the flames. But as the fire raged, it seemed to fight back, pushing harder against the walls, defying every attempt to control it. The team worked frantically, pumping a special chemical compound into the ground around the fire, designed to neutralize the underground gas pockets that fed it. But as the flames roared higher, the compound seemed to have little effect. The fire reacted. It flared up as if it had a mind of its own, as if it was aware of the team's efforts to stop it. For every step the team took towards sealing the fire seemed to push harder. The heat intensified, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. Strange vibrations rippled through the earth, as if the fire was a living entity fighting for its survival. But the team didn't stop. They had no choice. If they failed now, the fire would only grow stronger, consuming everything in its path. As the hours passed, Elena could feel the pressure mounting. The fire's heat had become unbearable. The air was thick with smoke and the constant hum of the flames. Sweat poured down her face as she stood in the center of the operation, watching as her team worked tirelessly to implement the final stage of the plan. They had done everything they could. Now it was time to extinguish the flames. With a deep breath, Elena activated the final stage of the containment system, which was designed to release a massive burst of suppressant gas, aimed at choking the fire and cutting off its fuel source. The team held their breath as the system whirred to life. The suppressant gas began to flow, and for a brief moment, it seemed as if the fire was starting to subside. The flames sputtered, flickering as if they were fighting for air. But just as they thought they had succeeded, something went horribly wrong. The flames flared up, higher and fiercer than before. The temperature soared to impossible levels. The suppressant gas didn't seem to have any effect. Instead of being extinguished, the fire seemed to grow stronger. The ground beneath them cracked open in violent tremors, and a massive explosion ripped through the desert, sending the team flying backward. Elena scrambled to her feet, her heart pounding in her chest. What had gone wrong? Was this the end? Had they made the mistake of awakening something they couldn't control? And then, through the smoke and chaos, Elena saw it. Something she couldn't explain. A dark shape rising from the flames, moving against the fire itself, as if it were part of the fire, but not the fire. It was tall, shadowy, and shifting, almost liquid in its form. For a moment, it seemed like the flames were parting around it, making way for this dark entity. "What is that?" one of the team members gasped. The figure moved slowly, its form indistinct, shifting as though it were made of smoke and fire, a silhouette against the raging inferno. Elena's mind raced. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be happening. The door to hell had opened, and something was emerging. The team had come so close to stopping the fire, but now they were faced with something far worse. An entity that had been sealed away beneath the earth for millennia. It wasn't just the fire they'd been fighting against. It was whatever this thing was. The dark figure stepped forward, its shadow stretching across the desert as the flames parted to let it through. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, the figure disappeared into the smoke, leaving behind an empty, silent desert. The fire continued to burn, but now it seemed to have a new purpose, as if it had been awakened to something far more terrifying than anyone had realized. The team was left shaken, knowing they had made one final attempt to close the door and had failed. The door to hell was still open, but what had they truly unleashed? As the flames continued to rage, Elena stood at the edge of the fire, staring into the inferno. The fire was no longer just a disaster. It was a portal to something much darker, something far older, and now that it had been opened, no one knew what would come next. The fire raged like a beast, consuming everything in its path, stretching its fiery fingers far across the desert, as though it were a living entity. For over 50 years, the flames of the door to hell had burned with an intensity that defied logic and reason. But now, something darker had been awakened. The fire was no longer just a natural disaster. It was a portal, a gateway between realms, and what had been sealed within for millennia was finally free. The team of researchers, scientists, and experts who had been studying the fire knew they were on borrowed time. What had started as a scientific inquiry had quickly spiraled into something much more dangerous. The fire had grown uncontrollable, and with it, a palpable sense of unease had begun to permeate the camp. The flames weren't just burning, they were alive, pushing outward, pulling something from beyond the veil of reality into this world. And that something was coming for them. Dr. Elena Morozov, the lead geologist, stood at the edge of the crater, her heart pounding in her chest. The air was thick with smoke, and the heat from the fire was almost unbearable. She could feel the ground vibrating beneath her feet, a deep hum that seemed to come from the very core of the earth. The fire, once confined to a small pocket of the desert, was now spreading faster than anyone could have predicted. Its flickering flames reached higher, swirling with a force that seemed unnatural. She couldn't help but feel that the fire was no longer just an accident. It was a signal, an invitation to something far darker, something that had been waiting to escape. The team had done everything they could to stop the fire, to seal the door to hell. But the more they tried, the more the flames fought back. It was as though the fire itself was resisting their attempts to control it. Each step forward seemed to result in a step backward, and the closer they got to the center of the inferno, the more they felt the oppressive weight of something watching them. As the fire grew hotter, Elena knew they couldn't stay much longer. The fire wasn't just an elemental force. It was something far more sinister. The team had seen the lights in the sky, the strange vibrations, and the whispers in the wind. And now, they were beginning to understand what they had truly uncovered. The fire was not a natural disaster. It was the beginning of something else. The panic started small, whispers of unease between the team members, moments of hesitation. But as the flames grew more uncontrollable, so did the paranoia. It wasn't just the fire that was out of control. The team itself was beginning to unravel. Dr. Samuel Graves, one of the paranormal experts on the team, had always been the first to speak of the fire as something more than just gas and heat. He had spoken of otherworldly forces, of ancient beings trapped beneath the earth. But now, even he was beginning to doubt his own theories. As the fire surged, as the ground trembled, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were no longer in control of their own destiny. Something had awakened beneath the fire, something that was reaching out, pulling at their minds, dragging them closer to an unknown fate. "I told you," Graves muttered under his breath as he stood by the campfire, his eyes wide with fear. "This wasn't just a fire. This is something else." Elena tried to calm him, but she knew deep down that he was right. They had opened something, and now it was too late to close it. The whispers grew louder, more distinct. They were no longer just strange sounds carried by the wind. Now, they were coming from within the very fire itself. As the team attempted to put out the flames, the whispers grew into a low, guttural sound, like voices trapped between realms, their words unintelligible, but their meaning clear. Something was trying to get through. "I think it's time we leave," Dr. Xavier, the team's youngest researcher, said, his voice trembling. "We've seen enough. We've tried everything. It's not going to stop. We have to get out of here before it's too late." But it was already too late. As the team packed up their equipment, Preparing to flee the site, a sudden explosion sent them scattering. The fire, which had once been contained to a small area, erupted in a massive burst of heat and flame, expanding rapidly. The shockwave knocked several members of the team to the ground, their radios crackling with static. The fire was no longer just a force of nature. It was a monster, alive and thrashing against its chains, determined to break free from the earth. The team stumbled to their feet, fear settling in their chests like a weight. They had to leave. They had no choice. But as they began to retreat, something far worse began to happen. The fire seemed to follow them, its reach extending far beyond the crater. The desert, once a vast and empty stretch of sand, now felt alive, as if the very land had been infected by the flames, the fire bleeding into the earth itself. The team's frantic escape was cut off by the ever-expanding flames, forcing them to take cover. It was then that they heard it, the screeching of something unnatural, something so loud that it drowned out the crackling of the fire. It came from deep within the fire, from the heart of the door to hell, and it filled the air with an unbearable pressure. The fire surged, pushing outwards as though it were alive, breaking through the ground, cracking open the earth like a wound being torn open. And then they saw it. From the heart of the fire, a shadow moved. At first, it was just a shape, something shifting within the flames. But then, the figure emerged fully, tall, dark, and horrifyingly inhuman. Its outline was a blur, a shifting mass of shadow and flame, its features indistinct but undeniably alive. It was as if the fire had given birth to something other, something from beyond their reality. The team could feel its gaze, cold and piercing, as though it were watching them, waiting for something. "Run!" Elena screamed, her heart pounding in her chest. They turned, scrambling to escape, but the ground beneath them shifted violently. The desert, once so still and empty, now felt like it was closing in on them, the sand shifting, rising as though the earth itself were swallowing them whole. The flames grew, a towering inferno now spreading across the landscape, stretching farther than anyone had thought possible. In their panic, the team broke apart, running in different directions. The fire was so fierce that it felt like the air itself was burning, the heat so intense it made it hard to breathe. But as they scattered, they realized something far worse. The thing they had seen emerging from the flames was following them. Its form shifted in and out of the fire, always just on the edge of their vision, like a shadow creeping behind them. "We're not going to make it out of here," Dr. Xavier gasped, his face pale with fear. "It's coming for us." Elena could feel her heart racing as the flames surrounded them. She had seen the fire grow more intense, more alive with every passing moment. But this was something else entirely. The team had tried to contain it, but they had only made it worse. Now, they were running for their lives, chased by something that had been waiting for them, waiting for the moment when the fire would break free. As they reached the edge of the desert, a few of the team members made it to safety, but not all of them. As the fire reached its peak, one of their own was lost, swallowed by the flames, his scream carried away by the wind. The survivors were left, breathless and terrified, standing at the edge of a ravaged desert, watching as the fire continued to burn, stretching farther and farther, its reach seemingly endless. But the worst part? They could still feel it. It was still out there, following them. The last few survivors made it to safety, but they knew one thing. The fire wasn't just a portal. It was a window into something far darker, something that had been waiting to break through. The team had been running from the flames, but they hadn't escaped what was on the other side. As they stood, gasping for breath, looking out at the inferno, Elena felt a growing dread settle over her. The fire was not just burning gas. It was burning something far more terrifying. And whatever had emerged from it was still out there. The flames continued to rage, and the team realized that the escape they had sought was nothing more than a temporary reprieve. The door to hell had opened, and now no one knew what was coming next. The fire in the Karakum desert had burned for decades, an insatiable flame that had consumed the land and left nothing but scorched earth in its wake. For 50 years, it had been an anomaly, a mystery that defied explanation, a natural disaster no one could control. But as the flames began to dim, as the heat finally started to subside, the true horror began to unfold. The fire might have burned out, but what it had released was far from over. In fact, it was just the beginning. The world had watched as the door to hell, a fiery chasm that had consumed the desert, gradually began to fade. But as the fires sputtered and weakened, something else emerged. The fire had been more than just a flame. It had been a symbol of a deeper, more ancient force, something that had been contained for millennia and had now broken free. The consequences of disturbing the door to hell would not be limited to the desert. They were far-reaching, and no one knew how deep the darkness ran. Dr. Elena Morozov, the lead geologist who had spent years studying the fire, stood at the edge of the now smoldering crater, her face etched with both exhaustion and fear. The heat had faded, but the unease in her chest had only grown. For weeks, she and the remaining members of her team had worked tirelessly to contain the fire, to understand its origins. But now that the flames had dimmed, they were left with an even more chilling realization. The fire had been a symptom of something much greater, something that had been unleashed, and they had no idea how to control it. The team had seen the signs, the strange lights in the sky, the mysterious hums, the flickering shadows that seemed to move within the smoke. And then there were the figures, the shadowy beings that had emerged from the heart of the fire, creatures that didn't belong in this world. Some had thought the fire was simply a gateway, a door to another realm. But now, Elena was beginning to realize the truth. The fire was not just a portal to a different world. It was a rift, a wound in reality itself. And whatever had come through was not merely a visitor. It was an invader. The fire had been a warning, a final call to something beyond human understanding. The team had tried everything, science, technology, folklore, hoping to find a way to close the door to hell. But now that the flames had died down, they realized that the door had never truly closed. It had only been left ajar, and something was waiting. Something was calling. It was as if the world had held its breath as the fire raged, waiting for the team to seal the rift, to prevent whatever lay beyond from entering. But with each attempt to control the fire, to contain it, something more powerful, more dangerous had been awakened. And now, with the flames gone, that something was growing stronger. Elena and the survivors knew that they could no longer just observe from a distance. The forces they had unleashed were no longer confined to the desert. They were spreading. The very earth beneath their feet felt different, as though it was vibrating with an energy that shouldn't have been there. The team had always suspected that the fire was not merely a natural phenomenon, but the fire had been a symptom of something far older, a force that had been sealed beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to emerge. It was then that Elena made the most terrifying realization of all. The fire had been a beginning of something far more dangerous than anyone could have imagined. The world outside the desert had moved on, unaware of the forces that had been stirred beneath the earth. News outlets covered the fire's gradual extinction, and the world celebrated the end of an event that had plagued the region for so long. But Elena knew the truth. The fire might have dimmed, but the door had never been closed. One evening, as the team gathered at their makeshift camp near the edge of the crater, the air grew thick with tension. The last of the flames had died down, leaving only smoldering embers behind. But a strange presence still hung in the air, a weight that made it hard to breathe. The wind shifted, and suddenly, the smell of sulfur filled their nostrils. It was a smell they had become all too familiar with, but now it seemed different, more pungent, more alive. Dr. Samuel Graves, the paranormal expert who had been part of the team from the beginning, looked up from his notes, his face pale. "I don't like this," he muttered, more to himself than to the others. "Something's still here." Elena looked around at the others, her heart pounding. They had all felt it, the sense that they were no longer alone. But this wasn't the same as before. The fire had been a phenomenon they could study, something that could be explained by science, even if they didn't fully understand it. But now, something darker had taken root. They had opened a door that was never meant to be opened. And now, whatever lay beyond it was no longer bound by the limits of the desert. The team had never believed in the ancient legends of the desert. Those stories about the fire being a gateway to other worlds, to realms filled with creatures and forces that should not exist. But as the days wore on, and the whispers of those who had lived in the desert for centuries began to echo in their minds, they couldn't help but wonder, had they been wrong all along? The fire wasn't just a natural disaster. It was the symptom of a much larger, much darker force, a force that had been sealed away, waiting for the right moment to break free. The flames might have dimmed, but the portal had not closed, and what had come through was still there, lurking just beyond the edges of reality, waiting for the chance to emerge. As the team began to gather their thoughts and pack up their equipment, Elena's gaze turned back to the remains of the fire. The embers glowed faintly, casting an eerie light across the desert. There was no more smoke, no more heat. The fire had burned itself out, or so they thought. But something was wrong. Something fell off. Suddenly, the ground beneath their feet trembled. A low, rumbling sound echoed through the desert, a deep vibration that made the very air feel thick with dread. Elena's heart raced as she turned to face the others. "Get back to the vehicles now," she shouted, but her voice was drowned out by the deafening sound that filled the air. The earth beneath them cracked, and the ground split wide open, sending them stumbling backward. From the fissures in the earth, a dark figure emerged. It was tall, shadowy, and its form shifted as though it were made of smoke and flame. The figure moved slowly, deliberately, as though it was waiting for something. Its eyes, glowing faintly with an unnatural light, stared at them, cold and unblinking. "It's here," Samuel whispered, his voice trembling with fear. "We've opened the door, and it's come through." The figure stepped forward, its form solidifying as it approached the team. Its presence was overwhelming, filling the air with an energy that pressed down on them like a physical weight. It was no longer just a shadow. It was real, and it was alive. The fire had dimmed, but the true horror had only just begun. The figure was not just a manifestation of the flames. It was the force that had been waiting on the other side, the force that had been released when the fire had opened the portal. As the team tried to retreat, they realized that the ground beneath them was no longer solid. The earth was shifting, warping, as though the very desert itself was coming alive. The fire was gone, but whatever had been trapped beneath the surface was no longer bound by the constraints of time and space. Elena and the survivors fled, but it was clear now that the door to hell had not closed. It had only opened wider, allowing something to break free. And whatever that something was, it wasn't finished. It was only just beginning. The fire had dimmed, but the darkness it had unleashed was far from over. The team might have escaped the flames, but what they had released was still out there, waiting, watching, and coming for them. And as the camera panned over the now still flames, the shadow of something dark and terrible shifted just beyond the smoke. It wasn't over. It was just beginning. As the fire fades into silence, one truth remains clear. The door to hell was never meant to be opened. What was unleashed has only just begun to stir, and the world will never be the same again. The flames may have dimmed, but the forces beyond the fire, the shadows that have slipped through the cracks of reality, are far from finished. What lies beyond those embers? What is waiting on the other side of the door? The answers are elusive, the dangers unknown, and the only certainty is that the mysteries are far from over. This was not the end of the story, but the beginning of something much darker. The fire was only the first glimpse into a world that we can barely understand, a world that threatens to bleed into ours. And just like that, the door to hell remains wide open, waiting, watching, and calling to someone or something. If you felt the weight of this mystery, the pull of the unknown, and the lingering questions that gnaw your mind, then you know this story is far from finished. There are still untold secrets to be uncovered, dangers to be faced, and realms to be explored. This is just the beginning, and you won't want to miss what happens next. If you've been captivated by the tale, don't let it slip away. Like, comment, and share your thoughts. What do you think lies beyond the fire? Who or what will answer the call? We want to hear from you. Your curiosity, your theories, and your voice are part of this story now. And if you're ready for more spine-chilling tales, more mysteries that pull you in and won't let go, then subscribe. Stay with us as we dive even deeper into the unknown. The world is filled with secrets waiting to be uncovered, and we're just getting started. The fire may have dimmed, but the door is still open. Will you dare to walk through it with us?